Hi, welcome back to Storytime. I really want to feel like I earned my nap today on this weekend autumn afternoon with the golden colors drifting in here. So let's do another chapter, and maybe I'll start some more laundry before I nap, and then I'll feel justified. Because what is better before going to sleep than a little zombie action? Zombie action. Good for your naps. Good for my naps. Okay. Story time. You can really tell that being cheap and thrifty is a huge part of my identity, because I never spring on any of my glasses, new or old. I never pay for the anti-glare stuff, so there's a lot of glare. That's life with me. Story time with Beth. The leaving. I woke up freezing. Mucky water raced over my belly and burbled away down the channel. I sat up, held my head. It pounded, throbbed. Where was I? Am I in the stream? Why am I in the stream? I looked around. I couldn't see much. It was dark and there was no moon. I could hear the light thump, thump, thump of Dad's pendulum striking the kitchen wall. I wondered how many zombies were gathered around it. I should go check, get rid of them and go to bed, warm with my family. I crawled up the stream bank. It was slippery with mud and I could hardly walk on my cold, numb toes. Hey, here's the microphone. Would that be a good idea? For story time? Reading aloud? I crawled up the stream bank. It was slippery with mud and I could hardly walk on my cold, numb toes. A sigh burbled in my throat. How long had I been unconscious down there? Why was I down there? What a horrible place to fall asleep. Had I fallen from a tree? Had I been pushed? And where was my hammer? Where are Mom and Dad? Hector? Juliet? I stumbled across the lawn to the kitchen. There were only 3 zombies at the pendulum banging away there. That many I could take out with a lump of chopped wood. I grabbed a thick, knotty piece of pine with a broken branch for a handle. I felt my shoulder stretch and pop as I swung it over my head. It tingled slightly. The first zombie, an ex-man, dressed in safety pins and torn cotton stripes, fell down motionless after just one clobber. The second, an ex-woman wearing a flaming guitar hoodie, I tapped on the shoulder to turn it around so I could get a better shot at its bent head. It fell down, heavy as timber. The third zombie was tiny. I spun it around, raised my lumber. It looked up at me. It lunged for my belly. I paused, looked at my hands in the faint light of the tiny lamp over the pendulum. My hands were gray. Or green. Gray and green. The little zombie dug its fingers into my belly. I looked down. I wasn't bleeding. I was seeping. Thick, black goo. Shiny black. Pitch black. And my skin was pale. I removed the little zombie's fingers from my skin and held it back. I cupped its chin in my palm, looked at it good and long. It was Juliet. It had been Juliet. It wasn't Juliet anymore. It was ex-Juliet. I knew that it wasn't Juliet anymore. I dropped my log. It wasn't her. She wanted to eat me. She didn't know that it was me. Oh gods, am I me? I looked down at my hands. They're gray and green. Gray and green and cold. The tiny hole in my belly doesn't hurt. It tingles and oozes thick, pungent tar. Am I an it? Juliet lunged at me. It lunged at me. She was an it. It was missing one shoe. Its skin was as cold as mine. Was I an it? I didn't feel like an it. I didn't want to eat anybody. I didn't want to eat at all. Food sounded terrible. But I look like an it. My throat gurgled. I sounded like an it. Hello? I could speak. I couldn't remember anything, but I could think. I wasn't biting. But ex-Juliet was. She was biting me. Where was Hector? Was Hector an it now too? Mom and Dad? Were they all its? Were we all its? Where is everybody? I couldn't remember. I left my ex-little sister by the kitchen. I stumbled to the front door, turned the knob. It wasn't locked. We never worried about it because zombies couldn't use doorknobs. But I did. I opened the door without letting it creak. I remembered how. The living room and bathroom were empty. The whole place was dark. I crept up the first 5 stairs, stepped over the 6th. I looked in my room. The .22 was lying on the floor. 1 empty shell lay next to it. What had happened? I pressed my ear against the bedroom door and quieted my breathing. Mom was sobbing, muffled a little bit by a pillow or a blanket. Dad was hushing her, the sound of his hand on her back louder and warmer than the whistling coming from my nose. Hector tap, 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 tapped on the window, ignoring the sobs from the nest. So my parents were sad. They were not its, but they knew that Juliet and I were zombies. Then why hadn't they killed us? Why had they abandoned us to wander alone forever? Didn't they love us? Not as much as they had loved Imogen? Hadn't they seen it happen? Weren't they going to finish us off? Didn't they want to make sure that Juliet and I met an honorable end? I put my hand on the door to knock the secret knock and ask them to explain themselves. But then I could see my hand again. My fist was gray and green. If I did knock on the door and they saw me, they would kill me for sure. Did I want that? Should I run? Have I already run once? Is that why I was in the stream? Had Dad been shooting at me with a .22? I had jumped in the water to hide from him. Why hadn't they finished Juliet either? They were probably just waiting for daylight so that they could come and finish the job. How had Dad missed? What was wrong with them? Couldn't they see that I wasn't a regular zombie? They had already tried to shoot me and missed and couldn't tell that I was different, like with the wobble pox. I could talk and think and not bite. I had used the doorknob. I was their daughter. They should be able to tell that I was immune. I pressed my fists to my temples instead of to the door. What should I do? Is this how all zombies feel? Or just some of us? How many of us? Poor Imogen. Had my older sister been immune? Had they killed immune Imogen? I backed silently across the hallway into my room. I stumbled over the gun lying on the floor. I knelt and looked out of the window that Dad had been shooting out of at me. There were skid marks carved deep in the gravel of the driveway. Somebody had peeled out quickly. I wondered if it was Dad, trying us to run over, or trying to get away from us. Either way, they wanted us gone. They didn't bother to check if I was immune. And they didn't bother to kill us. I was dead. I wasn't dead. I was alone. Not alone. I had my ex-little sister. I hung my hammer and my axe off the back of my pants. Maybe she wasn't regular either. Maybe she was immune like me. I'll go check again. I stepped over the creaking stair and let myself out the front door, closing it securely behind me. Juliet was scratching on the screen wall and groaning, trying mindlessly to bite the beetles that were trapped there. I held my axe above her head and spun her around by the shoulder, looking down into her little, lime-colored face. She wasn't immune. She was regular undead. I should kill her. But if I killed her, I would be alone. I certainly couldn't leave her behind to be handled by the family that had so horribly botched our deaths. She couldn't hurt me anymore. I'm immune. I could take her with me. We could wander together until I found a way to deal with us both. I have got to get out of here, I told her. I pulled her by her arm. When I let go, she stopped, heard my footsteps in the grass, and then followed me. Hector tapped on the window above us. He waved. I blew him a kiss. He pressed his nose against the window, steaming the glass with his slippery nostrils. He waved again, tilting his head onto his bony shoulder. Juliet bit me on the side. I walked away, Hector clutching the curtains above me, and Juliet following behind, letting me go first, still a big sister. She followed me away from the farm through the end of the summer. We never went back, never even looped nearby. We had to hide from those who couldn't handle us. It's my job to deal with us now, not anyone else's. After days and days of hot, sweaty afternoons and avoiding our neighbors, I took us deeper and deeper into the woods, trying to think of what to do. Yellow, red, and orange leaves started to fall on us and stuck to our exposed skin in the rain. First we plodded through the brownish tree rubbish, and then through the snow that was carelessly discarded by the clouds in the mottled, sickly sky. In our corduroys and t-shirts, we slipped on patches of ice and frostbit the tips of our fingers and noses. It just tingled. It never hurts anymore. We're mostly numb, and sometimes foolish. We risked walking down a road so that I could skitter to the first abandoned car that we saw. Somebody had already walked off with the engine and the tires, but there was still a body inside. I stole its pillowy down jacket and lashed it around Juliet. I pilfered a torn canvas tarp from the trunk and made myself a filthy, ragged poncho. When I heard a tractor approaching, pulling a trailer full of something that we couldn't afford to stick around and steal, I dragged Juliet away by her new hood. She wasn't fast enough to avoid getting caught. She wasn't like me. She wasn't thinking at all anymore. She got stuck with her feet wedged under logs instead of climbing over them, and she wandered away every time I stood still, so I tied her up at night to whatever tree I slept in. She never spoke, she never slept, she never ate real food, only sticks and bugs, and tried to go after bigger things too, like deer or possums, anything she could hear or see or smell moving. I didn't eat real food either. I wasn't hungry, so I didn't mind that there was no food to find further and further into the wilderness. I stole a sesame bun once when it smelled good, cooling in an open windowsill of a farm. I ran away with it and crouched with it held under my nose. It smelled so good, almost as good as Mom could make. I held it for a long time before I chewed it up and swallowed. It was too dry and crumbly, without enough spit in my mouth to dissolve it. I could still feel it sticking in my stomach a week later. 2 weeks later, the bun still just sat in my stomach, rotting and making my goo smell like garbage, until I couldn't stand to have the festering lump bulging out of my side any more. I took my axe and used the corner to make a slice in my gray-green skin. It oozed and tingled a little, but it didn't hurt at all, so I went ahead and cut through my stomach lining as well. It tingled some more. I used my fingers like tweezers to pull out the moldy, greasy bun pieces and drop them onto the ground. Juliet sniffed them as they hit the dried pine needles, but she opted to chew on my ankle instead. When I had all of the bread removed, I pinched the walls of my stomach back together until they started to congeal, and then I did the same with my skin. It didn't need stitches or bandages. Everything that cut me just felt tingly, and then it healed, slowly, like a slug inching along. It didn't matter if it was Juliet's teeth, a sharp twig that snapped in my face, or my own axe performing surgery. My zombie parts wouldn't die, and my human parts just kept repairing them. Juliet's cuts didn't heal like mine did. She wasn't human at all. She had a permanent gash where I let her walk into a tree trunk, a patch of dry skin where I let her rub against a boulder while she tried to rip her hood off of her jacket, and her worst injury was a broken ankle from when I didn't stop her from wandering off a steep cliff. She just walked right off of it without even looking, fell 40 feet. I ran to her, but by the time I got there, she was already walking around again, rocking from one foot to the bent stub of the other leg. She kept stumbling away from me and everything that was best for her. I hoped that she would become immune, that I could teach her to follow me, to sit and stay, maybe to talk someday, to not chew on my skin, to sleep at night, that maybe an immune person could spend the time to train them safely. But she walked after She walked off after coyotes and empty farmhouses with snapping screen doors or a truck rumbling past. Always the other zombies. The creatures followed each other to food, noises, smells, anything that moved. And water. Water of all things. Our zombie bodies need water to keep going. No wonder streams and lakes and oceans are so dangerous. Water is what keeps the black goo flowing. That's all the zombies would follow. Moving things that they tried to chew on, and the water that they could lap up and snort in through their noses if they still had them, drinking until their guts were engorged. Then they rolled and sloshed like balloons with skeletons inside. I tried to drown Juliet in a small river. When she went in to drink, I held her under for 20 minutes. It would have been an easy way for me to end her, without having to see her face. But she never stopped moving. She just emerged from the current, chilled to the bones, refreshed and ready to gnaw on my arms. I couldn't bring myself to bash her head in. I tried. I raised my axe. I raised my hammer. I took aim and then I let my hand drop to my side. Maybe I should have stolen a gun from home so that I could have had some distance. But no matter how cold and green she wasn't a danger to me. I was already infected. Maybe it took longer than anybody knew. Maybe an immune person could train a zombie to sit, stay, and talk without getting bitten. Or take care of them until they grew better. I wasn't going to bash her head in prematurely, not while she had me to look out for her and keep her warm. We were always cold. We had no fire inside of us anymore, so I had to brush the snow off of logs and branches and build flame after flame after flame, night and day. But Juliet wouldn't stay near any of them. I held her in my lap while she writhed to get away. When I tied her nearby, she stretched as far from the licking fire as she could, as far as the rope would let her, the only moving thing that she hated. I tethered her like she was interesting, wrapping my hair ribbons around the end of a found scrap of rope so that it wouldn't rip her skin too badly. When I couldn't keep her near the fires, when she got too cold to move, I pulled her behind me on a sled of sticks that I tied together with my shoelaces. The blisters on my heels only tingled as I dragged her past the other zombies who froze solid without big sisters to look out for their core temperatures and dehydration during the terrible winter. I slid her past the rigid monsters with stone-stiff, slack jaws, our own personal sculpture garden. They didn't snarl. They didn't care that they were half naked and dripping with icicles. They just stood, silently gaping in their worn-out and outdated outfits. I tipped them over into the drifts of white powder. I snapped off their reaching limbs and laid them down on the ground, in front of their feet, so that when they woke up in the spring, they would trip over their own arms. I put a pair of eyeglasses back on the face of a zombie who had frozen with them in its mouth. I broke the lenses first, though, and made it a mustache out of pine boughs. I laughed and pointed for Juliet to look, but she just ground her teeth against the rope. Every day that I could force myself to stand up, I kept us hiking through the forest in elaborate circles that would keep us out of human sight. But I couldn't make myself stand up every single day. Some days I just sat, letting the fire shrink down to cinders, my eyes leaking gray waterfalls down my green cheeks, which I could only see when I looked into a frozen pond. But my hands I could see every day. They were right in front of me, showing off my gray and green hue every hour. Every minute I knew that I was doomed. The sun came up. We would blink into it. Juliet would chew on me. And then, if I could make myself stand up, I would hike us over another random stopping spot, safely out of sight, next to the zombie corpses that I had already defiled on our last pass. We passed the same stump shaped like a bear 6 times in 2 months. We were circling, staying away from everything dangerous that moved. Coyotes, farmers, their dogs that barked themselves hoarse whenever we passed. What else were we going to do but keep walking? The first time that I saw the distant outline and the inky mass of the big city, Turrington, I turned us around and marched us back to our safely established paths. I was losing what was left of my mind in the woods, but the city was full of people that would love to crush our skulls, and I had decided not to let that happen. Maybe. Not yet. But from every hilltop for the next 2 days, I could see the silhouettes of Turrington's apartment buildings and factories and the smoke from other people's fires. Living people's fires. I could see lanterns bobbing up and down the highways. I thought about all of the hikers heading into the city while Juliet's barely thawed jaws worked rhythmically against my shoulder. I held her closer. All of those hikers had propane and mittens and matches and lighters and scarves that we could borrow, and she only grew harder and harder to control while I walked farther and farther from our paths to find kindling. I found the highway, alone first, and then with Juliet in tow, just to sniff it out, just to see what it was like, try our luck until it grew too dangerous. Then we could head back into the woods when we needed to. There were a few trucks moving along the yellow lines, their 6 wheels rumbling mightily past the hikers who were hauling their backpacks and sleds full of supplies into the city, sick of winter weather. I licked my cold lips and warmed my hands over the small fire that I built for us, a few fields away from the road, willing myself not to go and grab some of their hot tea, which I could smell brewing over their grills next to the sweetmeats. I remembered how awfully stuck in my stomach the bread had felt. It made it easier for us to follow them at a safe distance, melting plain snow to drink as they trudged into Turrington in front of us, with their perfumed presence. The Turings ignored the hikers when they reached the city limits. The broken barbed wire barriers that were unguarded, or the resident commuters muttered at them with their strange northern accents. I wondered if the hikers could understand their insults. They paced past the outdoor market stalls, heads held down, hoping that nobody would push them around or steal the venison out of their sleighs. But the city folk didn't know how to look for fresh meat on the backs of grubby, sloppy hikers, so they let them go past with only sneers and rude gestures. They'd probably never seen hikers or drivers, and they didn't know any of our tricks. I hid us behind bushes and trees and crept slowly up behind them, a few ditches behind, until the hikers entered the city and split up into smaller bands on their own weary ways. I chose a small family with sharpened spears to follow. At least when they caught us, they would either dispatch us expertly, or there would have been a few of them for me to escape, whichever I decided. I hid us behind the overflowing dumpsters of the high-roofed pile trash cans they plodded past in front of us. Nobody wanted to see us. Nobody looked around during the day, and nobody came out after dark. Nobody even twitched a muscle below the 5th floor of any of the buildings after the sun went down. Turrington fell asleep and locked up early. Every neighborhood, the markets, the old wharf, the factories, the houses, had empty buildings. Some were burned, others just looked abandoned in a perfect beehive for squatters. Those who could pay rent lived in the buildings that still had front doors, but the poorest of the poor, the hikers, the squatters, the freshly bitten, scurried to make themselves personalized holes in the abandoned walls, stealing electricity and water from the civilized establishments. Snaking cords and makeshift pipes were built and maintained faster than the cannery, rope winder, propane filler, or electronics stores could scrape them away. The understaffed factories didn't want to deal with the squatters' buildings. The richer citizens were happy to let them drain the riffraff from the rest of the city. I didn't blame them. I didn't want to go into squatters' quarters either. But Juliet needed walls and a roof. I needed to steal some things in order to hold her together. She was starting to fall apart. I watched the small family that we followed for a week, pinning us behind a trash can of infected rubbish while I watched how they moved around the city folk. They lugged their packages and belongings as high up in the buildings as they could go, all members of every size helping out, and then they blocked the gaping front entrances with large pieces of broken furniture and sleighs, which was foolish. They could have burned those to keep warm until anything could actually stumble into a building well after the first spring thaw. It was more than likely that they were blocking newly infected zombies inside with them. I dragged Juliet over the barriers hurriedly on our 7th night in the city. With not even a half moon to illuminate us, we scooted past the half couch in the doorway of the maroon brick building, 10 stories high. "Hustle, come on, let's get inside." I dragged her past the broken foyer tiles and up the splintered, creaking staircase, where a broken bulb thunked softly against the peeling paper. On the second floor, there were 2 apartments that still had attached doors, both gaping open. The rest were hingeless and empty. They smelled like rats and cat boxes. "Which one should we take, eh? Which one?" I asked Juliet. I poked my head into the first one and then into the second. The second door had better locks with a deadbolt and a chain. It also had some shelves, mismatched chairs, and scarred dining table and glass in both of the windows. I closed the panes. The wind rattled through, but they remained in one piece. Why hadn't anyone burned all of this stuff as fuel? I stopped to listen. There were no noises except for the scraping of rodent toenails on the ceiling above us. Nobody else lived low in the building, not even the 2 floors above us. They would never see us if I only went out at night. They would never notice if I didn't steal from them. I only would thieve from other buildings that I could climb into by the fire escapes, or empty buildings that had infected items left behind by humans too scared to touch them. I snatched armfuls of smeared woolen blankets from the trash bins outside and folded them into our new apartment closet. I made myself a nest to sleep in while Juliet roamed across the wooden floors all night long. She never slept, but I tried. Mostly I just listened to her shuffle and thrash when she caught a worthy dust bunny. When I did sleep for a few hours, I couldn't dream. When I managed to pass out into cold unconsciousness, Juliet always woke me up again with her thumping and growling. She always wanted some more water or another bite of my arm. She never got tired or sick of chasing the fuzz that stuck to the soles of her own feet. First, I found things in the trash bins outside or in the abandoned apartments on our second floor. I dressed Juliet in buttoned-up pink sweater that Mom would have liked, with its fuzzy bows and glossy snaps. It had a few black stains on it, and it was a little bit tight over the other layers that I had her wrapped in, but she would freeze less quickly this way. I wished that she would leave the hat on her head a little bit longer. It was brightly striped fleece with a tail and a pom-pom that Hector would have loved to have chewed on. Whenever Juliet saw it flapping above her eyes, she ripped it off. I thought of our stupid, silly brother. Was he still alive? Should I care? Was he still living with a family who had left us to wander alone forever? Why hadn't Dad killed us? Wasn't he a good shot with the little rifle? How had he missed? Had he missed on purpose? Couldn't he have turned on the yard lights and killed us even in the darkness? Wouldn't he have felt better knowing that we were on the warm, flickering burn pile? Why hadn't he noticed that I was immune? What had all of his training been for? Juliet grunted at the end of the ribboned rope that I used to tie her to the fridge, and stretched her arms out towards me, her shoes squeaking against the grimy linoleum. Our building didn't have electricity, and we didn't need to put anything in the icebox to stay cold, so it was just another nice shelf to hold stolen propane, another cabinet to hold pots that I filled with water. It was a heavy enough object to tie Juliet to so that she couldn't pull it away with her. There weren't enough people left in the city to steal all of the appliances and fill up all of the apartments, so even mostly abandoned, ours was a nice building. We had 3 whole rooms, 4 if you counted my closet, but we never went in the bathroom much. After I saw myself in the bathroom mirror, I didn't want to go back in. I used the kitchen for water and closed the door to keep Juliet from splashing in the toilet. During the day, when we hid and I couldn't sleep, much less dream, I lay against my scratchy covers and remembered how my blood was black, how my gums were black, how my skin was gray and green. I no longer matched my family who let me go, except for my little sister who was an it that was a shameful danger to everybody but me, an it that still shared the golden flecks in my eyes. I rearranged the dried flowers on our table. I hung my axe and hammer on the wall in the living room in a way that Dad would have approved of. I got the angle just right, and then sat back to look at them, while Juliet cried for me to fill her mouth. I cried for much more. We both just rattled and moaned. Hefty stuff for my nap. That's how I process zombie stories. In my sleep. That's how we ended up with this story. Sweet dreams. See you for story time next.